Hello, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of Para New Orleans, the Paranormal New Orleans podcast, where we tell stories of the strange, the scary, the spooky, the paranormal, and otherworldly from across New Orleans, Louisiana, and the South. This is the final chapter of our Kelly series. So please sit back, relax, listen, and enjoy. Nadia Buchanan. Her name was Nadia Buchanan, and she was the first to disappear from the neighborhood bar over 10 years ago. Nadia Buchanan. I had to figure out what her connection was to Kelly and Courtney. I wasn't sure which direction I was going to take, but I knew I had to continue. I started first with a Google search, but nothing came up about a Nadia Buchanan being missing. I then decided to take it old school, and I went to the library to see if they had any old newspaper articles. I found one, just one. And it was written about a year after she disappeared. It was very short, simply stating the detective's name and that there was still no leads or information about Nadia's disappearance. My next step was to go to the police department and see if I could talk to this detective, see if he had any notes that he would be willing to share, any information at all that he'd be willing to share. I called the police department. I was put in touch with the Cold and Unsolved Case Squad. It took me talking to 5 different people before I finally spoke to someone who would give me the information that I needed. Turns out the detective who was originally on Nadia's case had passed away a few years prior. But he did leave his notes in the care of a friend. I got the information. It was another detective who had since retired. I was able to contact him through social media. He replied right away and told me he knew exactly who I was talking about, that his friend had given him lots of information about the case. I was relieved because I would finally have some kind of stepping stones to move forward in making this connection between these 3 women. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop the next day. He would bring the notes that he had, any information that he could share. I thanked him, and I went back to the place where my sister was found. It was evening. The sun was setting. The air was warm, but there was a slight breeze. I just sat in my car staring at the lagoon, again wondering if my sister even knew, or if she was already gone by the time she went into the water. That question haunted me. Kelly didn't deserve to die the way she did, nor did she deserve to be lost. I would do whatever I could to make sure that her memory, her legacy would be kept alive. As I sat, I felt myself getting chills. My hand got very cold, the same cold I felt when I encountered that apparition. The wind was picking up, and as I looked to my left, I could see Kelly standing amongst the trees. Except this time she wasn't alone. She was with Courtney. The side of Courtney's face very visibly smashed in. Her wet hair clung to the spot where her eye was supposed to be. You would think I would be scared or even unnerved. But I knew that they were simply searching for peace, same as I was. And then they were joined by the young man I met at the bar. I I felt so terrible for him. But I hope in some way I could bring him some type of comfort as well. I watched as they faded away into a light mist, the wind carrying them off somewhere. I turned, started my car, and the radio came on with that same static that I'd experienced the other day. The voice in the distance, but this time she was much clearer, and I heard the name Lawrence. I sat for a moment, listening to the static to see if anything else would come through, but that was it. And the radio returned to its normal station. I pulled away from the lagoon, ready to face another restless night, anxious to talk to the detective about Nadia. I got home, sat on the sofa, and I picked up the article that I had printed at the library, the one article that I found that was printed a year after Nadia disappeared. I read through it again, hoping that there would be some bit of information that jumped out at me. But there was nothing. I did my best to get comfortable. And I drifted off into a dream memory. Me and Kelly at the beach, playing as children, frolicking in the waves, laughing at each other, searching for shells to bring home. It felt so good to be there with her, to not be concerned about her soul not being at peace. It was comforting. It was something I needed, to be reminded to not focus on my sister's death, but to focus on her life, her joy, her energy, and the love we shared as sisters. At one point, we were standing in the waves holding hands, our eyes closed, heads tilted back, feeling the sun. And then I heard an unfamiliar voice whisper in my ear. It was Lawrence. And it immediately interrupted my peaceful dream time with my sister. And I sat up, still on the sofa, sun beaming through the windows, confused. Lawrence. It was Lawrence. And even though I had no idea who he was or what connection he had, I had no choice but to find out. I got up and pulled myself together and decided to head to the coffee shop a little early, even though it was still a couple of hours until my meeting with the detective. I could feel I was getting closer to the answer. I could feel I was right there. It was within my reach. I couldn't stop now. I couldn't be deterred. I was getting ready to solve my sister's case. I made my way to the coffee shop, found a seat in the corner away from the chatting moms and the students furiously typing away on their laptops. I looked out the window and I thought about how all of this was coming together, how I was being guided by ghosts, apparitions, and dreams. And I started to wonder how many of us have ignored those signs, those ghosts, those apparitions, those dreams. They are messages trying to guide us. How many times have we ignored them out of fear, out of confusion? My thoughts were interrupted by my ringing phone. It was the detective. He was pulling up. I described to him what I had on and told him where I was sitting. He described himself as well. So I stood to watch him walk through the door. And in his hand, he had a folder with just a few pages poking out of it. We shook hands and sat down. He gave me a bit of information about the detective who had originally investigated Nadia's case. He pushed the folder over to me, letting me know there wasn't much here, but he hoped it would help. We chatted a bit more about Kelly. I didn't mention Courtney. I didn't want to make him suspicious or even get him interested, because then I would have to explain all of the supernatural things happening around me working on solving my sister's murder. We talked for a few more minutes, and he excused himself, letting me know that if there was anything else that I needed, to just call. I told him thank you. And then I took a deep breath and I opened the folder. And there were several pages of handwritten notes. And one photo. And I gasped when I saw it. Nadia looked so much like Kelly. And even though I hadn't seen Courtney's entire face, there was a resemblance to her as well. I got a churning in my stomach. I read through the notes discussing the night of Nadia's disappearance. Nadia worked at the bar, but she was also married to the owner, Lawrence Buchanan. When I read the name, I almost choked. According to the notes, the night Nadia disappeared, her and Lawrence had had a very nasty argument in front of some customers. She stormed out of the bar and drove away. No one reported anything about Lawrence going after her. They claimed he stayed until everyone was gone and he locked up, and that was it. It was Lawrence. Could he also be responsible for Kelly and Courtney's deaths? I grabbed my phone and I did a search for Lawrence Buchanan. And all types of things about him popped up. I figured out who he was using details from the notes, birth date, description. He was apparently quite an active member of several organizations across the city, donated money to several causes, rubbed elbows with politicians, high-ranking police officers, even the governor. He was a man of means. And immediately I understood why there was so little information about Nadia available. I understood why there was so little investigation. Lawrence Buchanan had friends in the right places, and they helped him to cover up his wrongdoings. I placed a call to a friend to look up some property records. I needed 2 pieces of information. When did Lawrence sell the bar? And what was his current address? Turns out he sold the bar 2 years after the disappearance of Kelly and Courtney. She gave me his current address. I wasn't sure how I was going to approach him, but I needed to go and see his face, ask him questions. I needed to talk to him. He lived in an exclusive neighborhood in Metairie, which is not too far outside of New Orleans. I pulled up, still not knowing what I was going to say. But then I decided I would just say I was a friend of Nadia's and see what happened. I got out of my car, went to the door, rang the bell. A young lady in scrubs answered. I told her I needed to speak to Mr. Buchanan. She told me that he wasn't feeling very well, but she would be more than happy to tell him I had stopped by. I told her to please go and tell him I am a friend of his wife, Nadia. She told me to give her a moment, and she walked away. She came back a couple of minutes later and welcomed me inside. She walked with me to where Lawrence was. He was in a bedroom, sitting in bed, propped up on pillows. It's very thin, gray colored. There were quite a few pill bottles on the table next to him. The nurse pulled up a chair for me to sit next to the bed. Lawrence told her that she could leave a couple of hours early. Her relief would be there, and he would be fine. Sitting here talking and reminiscing with an old friend of Nadia's. She asked him if he was sure, and he said, absolutely. There's a lot we have to discuss. She said goodbye. We heard the front door close, and Lawrence looked at me and said, you're not old enough to be a friend of Nadia's. You must be here about the other two. The breath left my body. I've been waiting for someone to show up, he said. I've been waiting for someone to come and relieve me of my burden. Hopefully, I will be light enough to make my way into paradise. I just stared at him, wondering what kind of monster so casually talks about 3 murdered women. I have an aggressive form of cancer. I just found out about it 4 months ago, he says. It is wreaking havoc on my body and has spread. So the only thing they can do is make me comfortable. I'm just waiting for my time to go. But I'm glad you showed up. I can tell you that I had no intention on murdering Nadia. But she was going to leave me. And she was going to take everything from me, including our son. And I couldn't let that happen. She'd found out about some of my business dealings, some of the politicians I'd paid off. She'd found out about some of the nefarious things I did to make my money. And I couldn't allow her to destroy what I had built. So I had no choice. She left and went straight home. I stayed at the bar waiting for our patrons to finish their drinks. I locked up. I went home. She was packing up. I tried to talk to her, to get her to calm down, to get her to see things my way, to get her to understand this lifestyle that we had, this money, this luxury, did not come cheap or easy. She didn't want to hear it. So I had no choice. I was already prepared, just in case I couldn't get her to see things my way. She turned to continue packing. And I pulled some wire from my pocket. Went up behind her and wrapped it around her throat. And I pulled it tight. I remember hearing the squeaks coming out of her mouth while she tried to breathe. And I pulled tighter and tighter and tighter until she was completely silent. She went limp. And I let her body fall to the floor. And then I heard, "Mommy, Mommy." Our son, who was 3 at the time, had just witnessed me murder his mother. I went over to him and I picked him up and I told him, "It's okay, Mommy's just sleeping. Mommy's just sleeping." I brought him back to his bed, laid him down, read him a story until he dozed back off. I brought Nadia's body to her car that was parked in the garage. I finished throwing some things into her suitcase. Put it in the trunk along with her body. And started thinking about where could I go to hide her. And then it hit me. City Park has so many different lagoons. The bayou is right across the street. So I drove. I drove until I found a spot. I put the car in neutral and I rolled it into the water. And I stood there and I watched it sink. I walked back home. And that was that. I told everyone that Nadia had left me. And she left me with our son. He never said anything about that night after his mother disappeared. But for whatever reason, he never looked at me the same. I believe he saw the entire incident he was killed in a car accident with his grandparents a few years ago. He was the only one that knew my secret. I was fine for years. Until Courtney walked in the bar one night. And she reminded me so much of Nadia. I almost felt like I was seeing a ghost. I couldn't keep my eyes off of her. I couldn't stop looking at her. And we had a brief conversation. I gave her a drink. She even smelled like Nadia. And I don't know what came over me, but I had to get rid of her too. had this rage, this angry urge. So when she left, I followed her. We ended up at a red light. I bumped her car. She got out. And while she was investigating the damage, I went up behind her. I forced her into the trunk of her own car. I pulled off to the side, made sure she was hidden by the trees. I brought my car back to the bar and walked the few blocks back to where I'd left her. Still banging on the trunk. When I parked my car, I grabbed one of my hand weights. I opened the trunk and I struck her in the face with the weight. And then again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, until all I heard was a squeaky gurgling coming out of her mouth. I slammed the trunk closed. I wiped my hand. Hopped behind the wheel. I drove to the nearest lagoon in City Park. And just like I had done with Nadia, I guided the car into the water and watched it sink. Over the next few days, of course, people came looking for her. One young man who had said he was her boyfriend, asking too many questions, told me he'd done some research and he knew that my wife, Nadia, had disappeared many years before. So he had to go too. I had to make it look like a suicide by overdose. I thought it fitting to leave him sitting in his car by the same lagoon that Kelly was in, that Courtney was in. And then there was Kelly, very talkative, very sweet. She'd come into the bar quite often, so she knew who I was. I drugged her drink. She started getting loopy. I just told everyone, oh, she'd had a few too many. I was going to make sure she got home safe. I placed her in her car and drove it to a hiding spot in the park. I knew that she would be safe there for a while. I couldn't be gone too long, because eventually when people came looking, it would be said that I was the last one seen with her. I made my way back after just a few minutes. Told them I'd called her an Uber. Eventually, when the bar was closed, I went back. I sat in the car with Kelly for a while, just looking at her, because I couldn't believe how much she reminded me of Nadia. Eventually, she started coming to. She started fighting me, trying to scratch me with her nails, grab at my clothes. I grabbed her arm as tight as I could. I put one hand around her neck and then the other. And I squeezed as tightly as I could. You wouldn't believe how long it takes to choke a person to death with your bare hands. The amount of strength it takes. Then I drove her into the lagoon. I sold the bar eventually because too many disappearances and people would start looking at me. Nobody questioned anything about Kelly's disappearance. They just knew that her car had driven off from the bar The people who were there that night were so drunk they barely remembered who Kelly was. So I was safe. Now here I am. Here you are, searching for your answers. I hope you got them. I've already prayed and asked for forgiveness, so hopefully God welcomes me with open arms. And when he laughed, I felt an unfamiliar rage swell up in my body. And I remember looking down at my hands, not recognizing them. And then I felt like I was floating off somewhere. And the next thing I remember is watching myself stand up, lean over Lawrence, put my hand on his chest. The other hand grabbed a pillow from behind his head. And I could hear a voice saying, God will never welcome you into heaven because you are going straight to hell. And I could see the pillow going over his face. I could feel my body across his weak hands flailing, trying to push me off of him. And as much as I wanted to stop, I couldn't. I heard that voice again. Nadia. Nadia's voice. Nadia's voice saying, we are free. And with that, I snapped back. Lawrence had stopped fighting. I lifted his body up, tucked the pillow back under him, positioned him to make it look like he simply died in his sleep. And I left. I didn't care about trying to slip away quietly. I got in my car and I drove to the lagoon where Kelly was found. And I got out and I walked to the edge of the water. And I said, "Sister, you are finally free. Courtney, you are finally free. Nadia, you are finally free." I felt the breeze pick up, cool and comforting. And I felt my sister all around me. I wrapped my arms around myself as though she were giving me a hug and I was giving her one back. And I felt a light kiss on my cheek. And I knew that all of us had finally found the peace we deserved. Over the next few days, I packed myself up to return to Colorado. The news did talk about Lawrence Buchanan passing away from cancer. I went to City Park one last time. And I laid 4 bouquets of flowers at the water's edge of the lagoon where Kelly was found. Eventually, Courtney and Nadia would be found after an anonymous tip to the police hotline. Charles was the name of Kelly's boyfriend, Courtney's boyfriend. his mother received a letter explaining that her son's death was not a suicide, just an accidental overdose with some bad drugs. I felt I at least needed to give her some type of peace, to know that her son hadn't intentionally taken his life. That was the best I could do for her. If she was a religious woman, hopefully she knew that God definitely welcomed her son with open arms. I returned to Colorado and things for me went back to normal. There were no more dreams, no more apparitions, no more ghosts. And I went on with life. But I never forgot. I couldn't ever forget. My sister would always be with me. And even though New Orleans was the place where she found her demise, I would never forget her either. And this concludes the final chapter of Kelly. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this brings you peace, knowing that these souls were finally set free. Join us next time on Paranorleans, the Paranormal New Orleans podcast with your hostess, Fat Girl Freestyle. Make sure you are following us on Spotify. Please make sure you are sharing these episodes with your family and friends. And please make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, Fat Girl Freestyle channel. And as always, if you're feeling generous, Fat Girl Freestyle on Venmo and Chime, fatgirlfreestyle@gmail.com on PayPal. I appreciate you for listening and for being here with me. Take care. Until next time.